Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. Salvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati.
Sorry, guys. I tried to do a cold open and it didn't work out right. But here we go.
Oh, is this the lecture hall with Seymour Hersh? I'm looking for the one with Seymour Hersh because it's a policy and press hall event. So shouldn't we be talking about the Nord Stream since that's the biggest story of the century? And you guys, I mean, you have the executive editor of the New York Times there who came out with a phony story to try and block Seymour Hersh. It's just kind of funny how that happened, I mean, did you even acknowledge Seymour Hersh? All of you were executive editors of papers that broke Pentagon, My Lai, Watergate. Is this the same papers or not? I mean, is there anything you've gotten right in the last 20 years, or am I mistaken about that? I mean, it's just kind of funny because Iraq, wrong. Syria, wrong. Russiagate, really wrong. Okay, I mean, the list goes on and on. So the last thing you could do to try and actually fix your reputation is acknowledge that through leaks, we had to find out that Zelensky was going to bomb Moscow on the anniversary. I mean, if you're so impartial, shouldn't you at least say, right, that Zelensky was going to bring us on the verge of World War III? That seems pretty fair. While Julian Assange rots in prison, all of you got, fat checks because he's in jail for doing your job. And you know what? Tucker Carlson ain't no Seymour Hersh, but he did something you guys are scared to do. Speak the truth and actually be critical of the war, which is why he was actually fired from Fox, because you are all cowards. Every single one of you. None of you have actually had any relevancy. And you know what? The mainstream press is now dying. Nobody's ever going to listen to you again. You have no credibility with the public. The only people who care about what you have to say are elite assholes who have nothing productive to say anymore. And it's dying off. So will you at least say something, either about Nord Stream or Ukraine or the fact that Zelensky brought us to the verge of World War III and the only reason we knew about that was through leaks? Go ahead. It's a free speech event, right? You guys are the press. Let's say something here. Mr. Khan, come on. You're the executive editor of the New York Times, I'm just trying to get into some good trouble here, man. Woo, listen, Karen, get out of my face for a second. I got to talk to these gentlemen. Okay. Well, I just want to hear what they have to say. Go ahead. I'm done.
Wait your turn.
You're not going to tell them to you. Come.
Wait your turn.
You could project if we can't.
I would just say, I think it's important to hear everybody's point of view.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
All right.
I do think that we need to give our moderator a chance to ask other questions.
We're on the verge of World War III.
We're not doing that. Also do so. Thank
Let's
you.
go.
Really, thank you.
Say something about this bombing. We blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Listen, don't stand there while there are people rotting in prison. Nobody said anything about Uhuru, right? The socialists who are in jail for being critical of this war. God damn it.
Listen, go.
At least say something about the people in jail for being critical of this war. They don't deserve to be in prison right now.
Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. That was just Jose Vega. He was at an event where there were journalists who were on a panel, and Jose decided to call them out about their terrible journalist integrity. So shout out to Jose Vega for that. That clip is very important because it has something to do with one of the stories that we are going to discuss tonight, and we'll also talk about on call-in. So welcome all. Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, and Twitter. And this is Sabby Sabs podcast. Jose is out there doing the damn thing. So big props to him. I thought those were very valid questions. I'll show that again at the end of the stream for those who just joined. Quick shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. I really do appreciate it. You really are keeping the lights on around me, all four of them. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: members, Sabbies, Sabsters, Sabinators, and of course the ultimate. All of their names are listed here. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. Thank you guys so much. Really do appreciate all of your support. We have a lot to discuss tonight. And for the sake of time, usually I shout out the chat, but for the sake of time, we're going to actually go ahead and jump right in. I do want to give a shout out to Misty Simmons. Congratulations to Misty Simmons for becoming a Sabby member. Thank you so much, Misty. I really do appreciate that. Give Misty a big whoop whoop in the house. Okay, we're diving right in. We are diving right in because one of these stories is actually going to take quite an amount of time. Quite a bit of time. So what are we discussing tonight? Tonight, we are discussing Tucker Carlson and Don Lemon fired. Let's get into that story. You've probably heard a little bit about it. I do have new information in reference to Tucker Carlson, so I'm glad that I'm doing this tonight because that information came out today. I'm also going to discuss Krystal Ball DNC anger. Why is Krystal upset? We're going to get into that discussion. I'm also going to discuss Clare Daly goes off. Of course, you guys know Clare has been very critical about this war in Ukraine, Russia-Ukraine, and also all wars, actually, to be honest with you. She has some things to say, and I have some things to say as well in reference to this conflict. And last but not least, we're going to discuss Richard Wolff, the U.S. empire falls. And this should be a wake-up call to anyone. If you live in the U.S. right now, Richard Wolff has predicted this time and time again, and it appears that we have reached that moment. So we're going to talk about that as well. If you have not had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button. That helps me with the algo. Thank you so much. Okay. Geez. Let's go ahead and get into the first story. So much has happened. Like, I have Mondays off, and then I come back Tuesday and I'm like, so many stories have happened. I don't know which one to pick to talk about. But I managed to find a few that I wanted to discuss. We're going to dive in with this story here about Clare Daly, because you guys know Clare Daly has been very vocal on the EU Parliament floor about how she feels about this conflict between Russia and Ukraine and all wars, to be honest. She's critically called out NATO. She has given a new speech that I think everyone needs to hear. So I have 2 clips I want to play from her. This new speech, and then I want to go back to a speech that she made in March about what's happening to people in Ukraine because of this conflict. So let's get started with this one here. Now, this comes from Six Side, so shout out to him if you guys know him. He said, everyone needs to watch Clare Daly, Irish MEP Clare Daly, with a message for NATO. And I 100% agree. I think you all need to hear this. So let's dive right in.
Have overstretched themselves. The people of Europe and the people of the world have absolutely seen through them, and their days are numbered. We see the jingoism wearing off. The vacuous call of standing with Ukraine is ringing hollow now. Ordinary people can see that this war is being financed and paid for with the lives of Ukrainians and Russians and with the living standards of the people of Europe. And all for what? All to line the pockets of a military-industrial complex which has controlled the US presidency no matter which side manages to win, and a military-industrial complex which is now taking over the so-called leaders of Europe, who are not leaders at all. They're actually just followers and wimps generally in the main. So they may think that they have their war now and they have their military hardware, but that is the last ditch stand, because the people of Europe are beginning to wake up. The people of the rest of the world have long seen through NATO and the US. The global north is now a minority in a new world order which won't be based on the dollar, but will be based on a new system of multilateralism. The old colonial days of where the Western white man came in and dominated, they're gone now. And this present period, dangerous and tragic as it is really just their death agony.
You better go ahead and preach, Claire. Now I'm going to chime in here. We're going to play this again. There's a couple of things I want to say about the speech that she gave. I think if you have not, send this to as many people as possible, because they really need to hear this message. So let's go back to the beginning here. Let me go back and I'll chime in here and there.
Have overstretched themselves. The people of Europe and the people of the world have absolutely seen through them, and their days are numbered. We see the jingoism wearing off. The vacuous call of standing with Ukraine is ringing hollow now.
Yes, it is starting to ring hollow now, because people are starting to see, like, we've given them billions and billions of dollars, but it doesn't seem like there is a resolution that is coming to this conflict anytime soon. And I think more Americans are starting to wake up to this as well. It also does not help that the recent leak of the Pentagon documents also showed that there was no plan to try to end this war anytime soon, and that part of this conflict has to do with some type of planned regime change in Russia. So that information is out in the open now. So now more people have woken up to the fact, and they're starting to ask these questions. What is it all for? Why are we sending all this money? What is this really all about? So the more people question, the better off we are, I think, in reference to ending these wars and convincing more people to become anti-war. So let's go on. There's a couple other things I want to say.
Ordinary people can see that this war is being financed and paid for with the lives of Ukrainians and Russians and with the living standards of the people of Europe.
Let's talk about the living standards. We've been covering this for the past couple of months. The people in the UK couldn't pay for heat. They had to go to facilities called warm banks in order to get heat. You had an energy crisis that was happening in Germany. We talked about that. We played videos about that on this show. People in France have had enough. The protests in France weren't just about the pension reform. There was also protests in France against NATO. So when the US government decided to put sanctions on Russia, yeah, there's some harm done to Russia, but not to the extent that it is done to their allies in Europe. Countries like the UK, countries like France, countries like Germany, they are actually hurting as a result of this, because if you depend on Russia's pipeline for your energy, then yes, if the pipeline is blown up, this is going to be a problem, obviously. So they have been hurt by this conflict as well. So Europeans, I actually think, are even more upset about this war than Americans are, but I do think more Americans are starting to get a clue.
All for what? All to line the pockets of a military-industrial complex which has controlled the US presidency no matter which side manages to win.
No matter which side manages to win. And this is why I continue to say it doesn't matter if we have a Republican that's president or we have a Democrat that's president. It doesn't matter, because the military-industrial complex controls both parties. That's why we don't see an ending to these wars. That's why the United States government is constantly intervening in other countries. That's why when we talk about bipartisanship, both parties actually agree when it comes to being pro-war. Yeah, you may have a couple of individuals here and there in Congress kind of scattered about that say they're against these wars. But when it comes down to legislation, they tend to vote along with the people in Congress that are not against these wars.
And a military-industrial complex which is now taking over the so-called leaders of Europe, who are not leaders at all. They're actually just followers and wimps generally in the main. So they may think that they have their war now and they have their military hardware, but that is the last ditch stand, because the people of Europe are beginning to wake up. The people of the rest of the world have long seen through NATO and the US. The global north is now a minority in a new world order, which won't be based on the dollar, but will be based on a new system of multilateralism. The old colonial days of where the Western white man came in and dominated, they're gone now.
We need to talk about this system that she mentioned where it will no longer be based on the US dollar. Look at what is happening right now with BRICS. Look at how you have countries like China and Brazil and now India, other countries choosing to collaborate and work together to have their own currency and no longer depend on the US dollar. She's 100% correct. The old school days of the US government being the police of the world, being the dominant economic figure, those days are starting to go away. And this is also connected to the Richard Wolff story that we're going to get into tonight as well, when he talks about the fact that the US empire is starting to fall. We have been warned about this. I think for a long time in this country, we have believed that we will always be number one. America will always be on top. Things are starting to change. And I don't think the US government ever stopped to think that these other countries would decide to come together and collaborate on their own and say, forget the United States. We don't need to follow their lead anymore. We need to band together and do our own thing.
And this present period, dangerous and tragic as it is really just their death agony.
She is spot on. One of the things that I've noticed with this conflict between Russia and Ukraine is that the mainstream media has not been, I would say, completely honest in reference to the casualties, right? Oh, Eric, I think I did something wrong. Could you, I'm trying to maximize this. I did something wrong. I don't know what I did with the tight VNC. I'll let you do it. But they're not being 100% honest about the casualties in reference to this war. You hear them talking about, well, Russia is losing. And is that necessarily true? You hear them tell you that all these Russian soldiers, they have so much loss in reference to Russian soldiers, but they're not telling you about the loss that the Ukrainian soldiers are also starting to have. And Clare Daly, actually, she made another speech. Now, this was in March, about the losses that Ukraine is also experiencing, especially when we talk about the death toll of the people. Listen to this speech.
Thanks, President. Listening to the cheerleading in here, safe and secure, thousands of miles away from the front lines, I think it would be a useful exercise for us to remind ourselves about what ordinary Ukrainians are experiencing. The Economist reports of forced recruitment across the country. Draftees with no experience or training are being sent to the front in what a UK minister calls First World War levels of attrition. Casualty figures are secret, but we know they're estimates of about 120,000.
You need to know that it's not just men, adult men that are fighting over there. They're recruiting boys, 14-year-old boys to fight, to go to their death, basically. And we said this a long time ago. There was no way, I don't care how much aid the US government gave Ukraine, there was no way that Ukraine was going to beat Russia. No way. And so when you hear people make this statement that we are willing to fight to the last Ukrainian, that really means they are willing to fight until every single Ukrainian is dead. That's what that means. I don't know why people are applauding that, but you heard that phrase at the World Economic Forum. You heard that phrase from politicians in Congress. You heard that phrase from the Biden administration. And people in the audience are just cheering and applauding as if this is something to applaud. That is not something to applaud. People don't even know what they're clapping for. They just clap just because they're sheep. Let's go on.
Battalion commanders tell the Washington Post of recruits fleeing positions en masse. Politico reports a crackdown on deserters. These are human beings, and there is a shameful lack of empathy for ordinary people in the war rhetoric in here. The debate is about keeping the weapons flowing to keep the war going. Ukraine is burning through a generation of men, sons, husbands, brothers who can never be replaced.
That's right. That's how many people. This is what people need to hear this.
This cannot go on indefinitely. And ye sickening war generals who sit in here and will these men to our deaths, you make me sick. We need peace. We need dialogue, however unpleasant that may be.
We don't have one person like that in Congress. Not one. So this war is a disaster. It is an absolute disaster. People are dying, which is what happens with wars, but it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And I think I missed I'm missing an article here. That's on me. 1 second. I have an article I want to go to because you need more people to call to an end. Like it has to, you cannot. And I think some people want to, but I think they're afraid to do so. 1 second, guys. I had an article I was going to show you. Let me just go to another thing. It was from Common Dreams that I wanted to put up. I think this is something that people need to hear. Hold on. About the left. Let me go ahead. I have it now. Because anytime you have, we're not calling them progressives anymore. We're calling them regressives, by the way. I shouted that out on Twitter. Don't call them progressives anymore. Don't call them progressives. Call them regressives because that's actually what they are. This article here by Common Dreams. Now, this article was published April 17th, but I want you to hear something that it says here. It says, the left and the Ukraine war. To be a leftist in the United States is a dispiriting experience. But in the last year, one of the more dispiriting things has been to see the attitude of many leftists themselves on a subject of crucial importance, the war in Ukraine. The consensus of the Washington establishment remains that the U.S. must support Ukraine against Russian aggression in the form of providing enormous amounts of military aid. We're going to change this word progressives with regressives. Regressives in Congress largely share this consensus, having voted for military aid and even cravenly retracted their letter to Biden in October that suggested he pursued diplomacy. Outside the halls of power, too, many leftists effectively support Washington's policies. To be sure, they add the qualification that one must also oppose American imperialism. But when they're supporting a U.S. proxy war that is providing pretext to increase military spending and expand NATO, an instrument of U.S. power, this is an empty qualification. The sad fact is that there is little vocal advocacy in the United States today for the only moral position, namely to engage in immediate negotiations to end this horrific war. And I want you to think about this for a second, because you don't see them calling for this. Not Bernie Sanders, not the squad. They've gone along just to get along so they can keep their seats. They're out here pushing for Joe Biden for 2024. These people are failures. And I don't want to hear any more excuses for them. I don't want to hear it. Because to be a leftist, one of the most simple things that you can do is to be anti-war. Simple. To be anti-imperialist. How can you say that you are concerned about climate change? How can you say that you support a Green New Deal? How can you say that you are an environmentalist and you are funding war? The military-industrial complex is the largest, single most polluter in the world. You are not a climate activist. You are not an environmentalist. Stop. Just stop it. People will ask me, why am I not saying this about the Republicans? I don't remember any of those Republican politicians running on that message. Not one. I don't remember it. That's why I don't talk about it. For the people who say, oh, you only talk about that. If all of those people ran on this message, I'd be ranting about them too, but they did not. So we have regressives in Congress that have actually moved further to the right and embraced this neocon ideology so that they can have a career in politics. Why is this a problem in the larger scale when you look at what it means to be a leftist? It is a problem because it waters down what it means to be a leftist in this country. Now, anybody can raise their hand and say that they're progressive. Anyone can raise their hand and say that they're a leftist. Because of them, because of the Bernie Sanders types, because of the squad. That's why it's a problem. It goes on to say here, instead, most liberals, conservatives, and even leftists seem to support Anthony Blinken's rejection of any ceasefire or negotiations that would potentially have the effect of freezing in place the conflict, allowing Russia to consolidate the gains that it made. In other words, negotiations have to be postponed until Russia is in a weaker position than it is now. In fact, the official U.S. war aim is to see Russia weakened to the degree that it can't do the kinds of things that it has done in invading Ukraine. Excuse me. That means Russia has to be so devastatingly weakened, preferably defeated, that its capacity to wage war is destroyed. But you don't see anybody in Congress saying this about the United States. I don't see any of those leftists saying that we need to make sure that the U.S. ability to wage war has to be destroyed or has to be subdued. This is how you know they're frauds. This is how you know it's fake. All of this madness and ought to be seen as such by any clear-eyed opponent of the U.S. empire. Before accepting complete defeat, Putin, whom, after all, we're supposed to view as bloodthirsty monster, would likely wage total war in Ukraine, possibly include use of nuclear weapons. So anyone who defends the U.S. war is advocating the destruction of Ukraine and perhaps a nuclear war. Aggression should indeed be opposed, but not at the expense of human survival or the survival of millions of Ukrainians. However, strenuously, it has been denied by Western supporters of this war. Russia has legitimate grievances that must be addressed in order to end the killing. It isn't a simple matter of evil imperialism versus a wonderful pacifist democracy. Scores of experts, including even cold warriors like George Kennan, have discussed that many provocations from the US, NATO, and Ukraine that brought on Putin's invasion, and we needn't rehash the whole history here. What is at stake is in large part a clash of rival imperialisms, a global one and a relatively minor regional one, which means there is no morally pure outcome, as there rarely is in politics. A peace settlement will have to be a compromise, which, like most compromises, will doubtless leave all parties somewhat unhappy, but at least will end the slaughter. And the politicians that we have, the regressives, they couldn't even hold their feet to the fire when they were calling for some type of diplomacy. They couldn't even stand by a letter that they all signed on. This war is not about saving the Ukrainian people. Anytime they tell you that we're going to fight to the last Ukrainian, you're going to fight till everyone's dead, you're not trying to save the Ukrainian people. This war, which has been revealed through those leaked documents from the Pentagon, this war is about regime change in Russia and supporting the military-industrial complex. There's a lot of money to be made here. That's what this is about. And anybody else, especially those who have the Ukrainian flag in their little bio on Twitter, most of those people have no idea what is actually going on here. It is our job to tell them. You have to spread that message. You have to let them know what this is really all about. If there was no money to be made here, this would not even be happening. Almost everything our government does is attached to money. Almost everything. Almost every piece of legislation that they pass has some benefit for corporate power. You have to understand that is why we don't get much. Almost every piece of legislation, even when you look at the climate legislation that they they boasted about, there was corporate benefits attached to that. Why else would Joe Manchin sign on to it? The only reason he joined, there was corporate benefit attached. So if there's no corporate gains to be made, most likely the legislation is not passed. This is why I continue to say you have to remove corporate money from electoral politics. You have to break away from that until you are able to get Wall Street and the military-industrial complex off the back of these politicians in DC. Nothing is going to substantially change for the American people. Now, I'm not here to tell you that voting for someone is going to change your life. It won't. I'm not here to tell you that if you put this person in office, you're going to get these big progressive gains. 9 times out of 10, you won't. And we need to wake up. People need to wake up to this reality. I'm so sick of hearing this. What about this person? What about that person? This person is going to be the one to change the game. This person is going to go to where Bernie never got to. Bernie could have got there if he wanted to. Okay? Let me say it again. Bernie could have gotten there if he wanted to. Bernie wanted to keep his seat, and Bernie wanted to write another book. And he took money from you, and he took money from me, and some of you canvassed for him, and some of you knocked on doors for him, and he sold you out 2 election cycles in a row. This is the reality, people. This is the reality. And right now, he's on Twitter. They've already put the articles out saying he will do everything in his power to make sure that Biden gets reelected. Bernie Sanders is not your friend. Bernie Sanders should not be your acquaintance. Bernie Sanders shouldn't even be in the same room with you, boo. None of it. That's my rant on that. Clare Daly, powerful voice. I really wish we had one person One person like that in Congress. And right now, we don't. I'm going to go to some of these comments here. I interviewed her too. You should check out that interview if you haven't seen it. What's up, iSong? Shout out to iSong. Welcome. Thank you for becoming a new member. Whoop, whoop. Thank you for the super sticker, Aberdeen 71. Rick says, I sent that daily video to my neocon brother and had a meltdown. I can imagine. Americans aren't used to hearing that. Shout out to my comrade JB, says, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the super sticker, Danny. Sabby, there's no peace talks. Love. It's BS. Yeah. Thank you for the super sticker, Andrea. I can't believe how many people have no idea of what is happening. Brainwashed by mainstream media. We're going to talk about mainstream media tonight. Thank you for the super chat. Make the best of what's around. Do you like Dave Matthews Band? There's a song by Dave Matthews Band called The Best of What's Around. That's one of my favorite, Dave songs. Yes, I am one of those Dave people. I think people either love or hate Dave Matthews Band. I don't know what that's about, but Sabby is speaking the truths with a passion. And thank you for the super chat, Terry. We must keep up this fight against capitalism like the French. Bingo. The French, they have the right idea. They know where the problem lies. They know. If you haven't had a chance to do so, go ahead and hit that like button, guys. That helps me out with the algo. And I'll go ahead and take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you. Thank you so much for the tip on Rockfin, Diane. Thank you so much. Okay, we are moving into our next story. What's up, Bratty Brat? Wow, so glad you were on recommended. I've been looking for someone like you. Thank you. And thank you for letting me know that this video was recommended, because I used to try to figure out how people found me. I used to do a poll. I used to do polls about that back in the day when I first started the show, and then I got busy and don't do it anymore. But that's good to know that this video was recommended, because it didn't used to be that way. Did not used to be that way. Okay, let's move on to this next story here with Professor Richard Wolff. So I was just telling you about how the U.S. is starting to see a decline, right? These other countries are collaborating together and they're deciding that they're going to do their own thing, which I actually think is really smart, because the U.S. is not going to be their buddy. But Professor Richard Wolff, he had a segment recently on Economic Update, and he's talking about the decline of the U.S. empire. And I think everybody needs to hear this. Let's go in.
We're talking about the emergence of a new world economy, a new order in the world economy. And in the first half, we spoke about the end of neoliberal globalization and the turn to economic nationalism. And we also spoke about the end of the stale, old debate between private and state, as if that were the issue, now that we have a world composed of hybrids, of mixtures of state and private that are all capitalist in the sense of that same old relationship between employer and employee. The next two out of these four defining qualities of the New World economy has to do with the American empire. And here the issue has to be faced squarely, although I understand and appreciate that that is difficult. The reality is that the American empire has peaked and is now declining. The data for this are overwhelming, as is the urgent tendency to deny it among people who find it frightening.
Let me explain what he's saying here when he says that the U.S. empire has peaked. We've gone as far as we're going to go. If you ever heard someone make that phrase that this kid peaked in high school, it means they went as far as they were going to go when they were in high school. And then after that, they just kind of dropped off. Just an example. But we've gone as far as we're going to go economically. Let's go on.
Which I understand. I'm going to give you some of the signs to make sure we all understand it. I'll start with a small one, and it'll get larger as we go. The tiny Central American country of Honduras recently decided to end its diplomatic relationships with the island of Taiwan and recognize as China the mainland. There are about 170, 80 countries in the world, only a dozen of which still recognize Taiwan as a separate sovereign entity.
Here we
A
go.
dozen, of which the United States is one. A dozen. Even Honduras. Think a minute what this suggests. Then there was the announcement a very few weeks ago made by a smiling Chinese foreign minister that a reconciliation of sorts had been achieved between two traditional enemies in the Middle East, Iran on the one hand and Saudi Arabia on the other. Countries virtually at war, although by proxy often, wrapped up in the Sunni versus Shiite struggles within Islam. They were going to establish embassies in each other's capitals. They were going to lay down the weapons of war and try to work together for a broader peace in the war-riven Middle East. The United States was absent. It has been trying to build peace in the Middle East, at least that's what we've been told, and couldn't do it. The Chinese, an emerging new power in the world, did it.
Yep.
The importance and the symbolism are only deniable if it's too hard to face what's going on. And then there are the mistakes in the Ukraine war.
Here we go.
Let me count several of them for you. Mistake number one, that you can keep pushing the boundaries of NATO, an alliance of the West, traditionally opposed to the Soviet Union. You can push them more and more up against and even into Russia. Well, you can't.
That's
You're going
right.
to have pushback. It's not going to be what you thought it would be.
Right. I just want to remind people, remember, after the fall of the Berlin Wall in Germany, that was not supposed to happen. So NATO was not supposed to expand in that direction. So here we are.
Made a mistake. The second mistake was to imagine that this would be a war between Ukraine, aided by the collective West, and Russia alone. Let me remind you all, Russia is a country whose GDP is about $1.5 trillion. The United States and Western Europe, allied against Russia with Ukraine, have a combined GDP of about $32 trillion. 1.5 versus 32. Mistake. This is going to be easy. Russia will be crushed. Didn't happen. Isn't going to happen. Require way more involvement by the West than was ever understood. Now in the neighborhood of $100 to $150 billion and counting. Escalation after escalation without the promised result. Turns out Russia has very powerful friends helping Russia be a much more important foe. These are too many mistakes that come out of a mentality that doesn't want to face that the world has changed.
And I question if it is actually a mistake, if these were actually mistakes, or if the U.S. knew that this was a possibility and chose to do this anyway. You know, I wonder sometimes. I appreciate Professor Wolff speaking out about this because I know he's an economist and he's a professor, but he has been looking at this war with Russia and Ukraine from an economist lens. And I think maybe for the people who think that the U.S. government is doing the right thing right now in reference to this conflict, maybe if they would switch their focus for just a second and look at it through an economist lens, the way that Richard Wolff is looking at it, and then you can see, yikes, this is not working out too well. And billions of dollars just gone down the drain. Let's go on.
The vast majority of countries in the world, particularly those in the global south, are not particularly moved by the West's complaints about Russia. They're not taking sides in that conflict beyond an obligatory vote and an obligatory statement that peace would be better than war. The United States has been unable to marshal anything like a global consensus around its position. These are all signs of empire decline.
Yep.
If I had more time, I'd go into other signs.
I want to add a sign. Recently, it was President Macron. Now, I have many criticisms of him. I've been talking about him for a lot the past couple months, actually. But it was recently President Macron made that statement that maybe Europe should not follow the U.S. lead anymore. Maybe we should become like a third power on our own and not just be at the U.S. government's beck and call. That was the first time in my adult life I heard an ally of the United States make that statement. He also said that he would not follow the U.S. lead and turn against China. So things are changing. Things are changing. I think that's another sign as well.
The challenges to the U.S. dollar as global currency. The fact that Iran and Saudi Arabia will provide the energy needs of China in the indefinite future on an extraordinary scale, shifting the balance of fossil fuel power for sure. The fourth and the final question about the new economic order is different because it's not a fact about what's happening, it's a question. What happens next? And these are the questions that are going to be the questions that we try to answer, and how we try, and by we I mean the human race, how we try to answer these questions will shape the future we live in. Number one, will the declining American empire be replaced by a rising Chinese empire?
That could happen.
That's the question. Just like the question at the end of the Roman or Greek or Persian or Ottoman or British Empire was, what empire comes next?
Right. The greatest example to point to is the Roman Empire. And I want you to think about something he's mentioning here in reference to China. And I'm not one of these channels that fearmongers people about China, just letting you know that if you're new. But one of the things I want you to understand is that if you look at the top 10 banks in the world, not the United States, but the world, China has 4 in the top 5. That was not always the case. The first time you see a bank from the United States is number 6, and that's JP Morgan. The next time is Bank of America, and I believe they're number 10, if I remember correctly. So What does this tell you? Economically, the United States is losing its power. The United States, look, going away from the US dollar, the US government probably never thought that would happen. They probably never thought, there's no way that China and Brazil and India and South Africa, and they're all going to get together and form some type of collaboration. They probably thought there's no way that's going to happen. Happened. Because you see, the thing about empires is that eventually an empire falls. It's just a matter of when. And we saw that throughout history, the Roman Empire, the British Empire, like he just said. And I think we are at that point now where the US empire is starting to fall. If other countries don't need to depend on us for oil or the US dollar, they don't need us. If they don't need us, they don't have to listen to us. And that changes that dynamic of the US government policing the world. You see how that works? We got a little bit more here I want to play as well.
Or another question. Will the question be that we create instead of another empire? That the human race grows up and says, we don't need and we don't want sequential empires. What we need and want is a multinational, multipolar world. We really need a world in which lots of different countries, larger, smaller, individual grouped, work out a livable arrangement for all on this planet.
This is the same thing that Clare Daly was just hinting towards in the video that I just showed you, when she said these countries are moving away from the US dollar and they are creating a multinational or multipolar environment. Is that the way of the future? And if that's the way of the future, who's going to be in community with us? Because we've pissed off a lot of people. I'm just going to be honest. Who is going to be in community with us? Is Europe, our European allies, are they going to choose to be in community with us? Or are they going to do what President Macron suggested? Are they going to say, you know what? All of the European countries, we need to all band together and become a third power and say F you to the United States? What if they say, why do we need to continue to follow their orders anymore? Why don't we have our own power? Then what happens? What happens to the US government's hold on the world? What happens to all of those 800 military bases that the US government has around the world? What happens? Canada might go on their own. I saw someone said in the chat, they said Canada, Plant Power Radio. Unfortunately, Canada will stick with the US, otherwise you'll invade us. That's interesting. Even Mexico, there's talks about Mexico possibly joining BRICS.
With its limitations. That's a big question. The ecological movements are struggling from their end to answer it around nature and environment. But the political forces, the national forces, the economic realities are just as important in changing and shaping the questions and the answers. The economic growth of China in the last 40 years, that other part of neoliberal globalization that wasn't just about Western capitalists making a lot of money in the East, but what it would mean for the people of the East and by extension of the global South. We are now realizing the enormous economic power of the Chinese and the Indians.
Yep.
And indeed, all of those countries we label BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. A powerful new pole in world development.
I want to say something here about the global South because I said this a long time ago, but I know I have new subscribers since then. Even some of these European countries that have social democracy, which is what Bernie Sanders talks about when he says he wants Americans to have the same like benefits as people in countries like Norway and Denmark, etc. Did you know that the reason why those countries are able to have some of the things that they do, where everybody can have unlimited vacation and everyone has healthcare, et cetera, and all that stuff, even if they are not exploiting the workers in their own country, there have been examples where they have exploited workers in the global South. That's usually where it will happen. If you look at a company like H&M, for example, they exploit workers in the global South. So if the global South, they're joining along with China, they're all together with BRICS, who is going to be exploited, continue to be exploited when they move away from the US dollar? How is that going to continue? A lot of people don't realize this. When you talk about those countries, I lived in Germany. I spent most of my childhood growing up in Germany. When you talk about those countries where they do have like democratic socialism or social democracy, whatever you want to call it, yeah, the people in those countries, the workers for the most part, yeah, they're not exploited for the most part. Like I said, they'll get the unlimited vacation. They'll get like 2-hour break, lunch break or whatever. Everybody has healthcare, those kinds of things. So when you go visit those countries, you're like, wow, everyone in this country is guaranteed housing. Wow, everyone in this country is guaranteed healthcare. And I agree with all those things. But I think it's important to mention that somewhere along the line, there are still people being exploited so that those countries can have what they have. And usually that exploitation will happen in places like the global South. This is something we have to really talk about more. There is a gentleman, Second Thought on YouTube. He talks about these kinds of issues with social democracy. Now, he is a socialist, but he does talk about this a lot. Definitely check him out. I should bring him on sometime, actually. I should reach out to him and see if I can bring him on. But people need to, this is something like, again, Bernie Sanders is not going to tell you this. Maybe Bernie does not know, like, to be honest. But if you talk to people who live in those countries, who live in the global South, they can explain this to you. And we're going to finish up here.
And the last question, and in the end, the most important one that we will be answering and that will shape the future we see in the new world economy. And that question is, will the kinds of friction and change and difficulty of this phase of capitalist development, this moving of its old centers and the creation of new centers, will it have the effect of agitating, mobilizing, and educating a global working class? I end with that because I think it's the most important thing to leave with you.
Very, very good points there from Professor Richard Wolff. I watch Economic Update once a week. Like, you guys should definitely watch that channel if you don't, because when we talk about having a working class, when we talk about having a class movement where people who are working class, hell, and honestly, these days, what's left of the middle class, can bond together and form some type of solidarity, we need to do so by talking about it as a global movement, not just a movement in the United States. And the reason why I'm saying that is because of what I just told you earlier, which is that you have exploitation of workers in countries like the global South. So you need to have that international solidarity. Now, there are many ways to go about doing that. Number one, we need to find some type of way to communicate with those people. There are multiple groups and organizations that do just that. But when we talk about having a class movement in this country, we need to make sure we're not just focusing on the United States. We need to make sure that we're adding our brothers and our sisters in the global south to this as well, because people in those countries are being exploited way more than people are in the United States, but it's all connected. So these are some of the things that we really do need to think about. But I got to tell you, when we talk about the U.S. empire, yes, it's crumbling. I want to show you some numbers. Let me go back to the screen, because I don't want to just tell you it's crumbling. I want to show you how it's been crumbling. Now, this is the history of recessions in the United States. Make it a little bit bigger. We're just going to go to a couple of key dates here. Most of you know what a recession is, so I'm not going to go into that detail. But let's start 1983. The Reading Railroad failed. 1873, the construction of the National Railway System created speculation that led to the collapse of the largest U.S. bank. 1857, something I want you to look at here. Notice how they did not put that one in order. But anywho, notice how the gaps between the recessions are larger. Those gaps will close as we go on. And this is how you know we're heading for more economic issues. 1857, embezzlement at the Ohio Life Insurance and Trust Company's New York branch triggered a panic. 1797, the panic of 1797 resulted from land speculation. The first Bank of the U.S. and the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, expanded the money supply, leading to boom and bust. Let's get to the 20th century. I covered this on a show. I did a whole show about this, the Panic of 1907. It was caused by speculators' losses that spread to trust companies. These firms acted like banks, but had lower reserves. Congress created the Federal Reserve System to prevent future collapse. So we go to 1907, and then we jump to 1929 through 1938, which is the Great Depression. Now you're seeing already over a 20-year gap in between those two periods for a recession. If you listen to economists now, they will tell you we have a recession like every 4 years. Let's go on. Boop, boop, boop. 1945. The recession lasted 8 months from February to October. This was a result of the demobilization from World War II. 1949, 11th month recession. This was when unemployment peaked at 7.9%. It was caused by the Fed raising interest rates too quickly. 1953, again, notice the gap. Okay, see, notice now the gap is starting to get closer. 1953, it resulted from tightened monetary policy following the Korean War. 1957, in this recession, which took place from August 1957 to April 1958, GDP fell from 4.1%, then contracted to a low of 10% in quarter one, 1958. Unemployment didn't reach its peak. It says the Fed's contractionary monetary policy caused an economic slowdown. 1960, notice the years are getting closer. The gap is smaller. This one, it says that unemployment reached a peak of 7.1% in May 1961. They don't even give you a reason for this one. Just know that it happened. Okay. Moving on. It says that President JFK ended that 1960 recession with stimulus spending. So just keep that in mind. 1970. This one doesn't give you a reason either. It just says it was a relatively mild recession and it lasted for 11 months. Unemployment peaked at 6.1%. 1973 through 75. The OPEC oil embargo is blamed for quadrupling oil prices, but actions taken by President Richard Nixon also contributed to the recession. Let's go on. 1980. So now we're getting into the period where Ronald Reagan is coming about. Remember, Ronald Reagan became president in 1981, I believe. It says, The Iranian oil embargo aggravated economic conditions by reducing U.S. oil supplies, which drove prices up. And this reminds me of Carter. Remember some of the criticism that people had about Jimmy Carter during that time, actually like the year or so before, was that they didn't like the way that he handled the Iran-Contra deal. So that's some of the criticism that I heard about Jimmy Carter's presidency for people who were alive and were adults during that time. I know Midnight Karma, Reagan. I know. 1990. I remember this one very well. It was caused by the 1989 savings and loans crisis, higher interest rates, and Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. So my dad was in Desert Storm, so he was there for that. So I remember this. Let's move on. 21st century. This is when everything, the ball just drops. 2001. This recession lasted 8 months. The Y2K scare had partially created the boom in 2000. Raise your hand if you remember Y2K. You guys remember that? Companies bought billions of dollars worth of new software because they were afraid the old systems weren't designed to transition from the 1900s to the 2000s. Many dot-com businesses were significantly overvalued and failed. For younger people in the chat, it was believed during this time, in the year 1990, there was this belief that the world was going to end when the year 2000, when we went into the year 2000, because the computer systems only went up to 1999. I'm not kidding. For the younger people in the chat, like people had like doomsday bunkers created and everything for this because people thought that that was going to be the end of the world. The 9/11 attack worsened the recession. That's important to know as well. And this one, I think most of us remember this one. Who can forget 0809, the subprime mortgage crisis? And I'll be honest with you, financially, economically, things have been tough since. At least for me, it was. It was tough since 08. This was during a time when I had to have 2 jobs. I had a college degree, I had to work 2 jobs. People didn't want to hire you for a professional job during that time just because they were not available. It was very hard, very, very hard. Okay. And now 2020 recession. Okay, so it said March of 2020, the Federal Reserve lowered the Fed funds rate to basically 0%. Congress issued billions of dollars in aid. The U.S. economy contracted a record 31.2% in the second quarter after falling 5.1% in the previous quarter. In April 2020, the U.S. economy lost an astonishing 20.5 million jobs. So we all know, we know what happened in 2020. But notice how they don't even mention that. They don't even mention the pandemic when we talk about the 2020 recession, which is really interesting. But that being said, Professor Wolff will tell you recessions happen approximately about every 4 years now. It's crazy. But yes, the U.S. empire is falling. I'm going to go to some of these super chats and then we'll go to the next story. Michael says, Don Henley, it was an inside job. Don Henley from the Eagles? That Don Henley? RD, is Dave Matthews Band the divide between young gen millennial and old? I'm born in 95 and never heard of them. It could be. Dave Matthews Band, I think their first CD came out in the 90s. I think that was like late 90s. But yeah, they were really popular from what I remember. I don't think they're as popular anymore as they used to be, but thank you for the super chat. Yep, X. Hey, Sabby, can I have advice? I've been struggling with suicidal thoughts due to being ostracized and mocked by my family because of my political views. As someone who's disabled and needs help, I can't cut myself off from them either. I would say to reach out to a counselor. Reach out to someone to talk to. YepX. I'm really concerned. But if you're having those types of thoughts, reach out to a counselor. There's also a suicide hotline that you can call as well. But please do that. And I'll tell you this about family. In reference to family, look, you got to be you. You have your own views and your own belief, right? I think all of us have gone through this some point or another where we've had views that maybe we're not on board with, like our family's views and things like that. But at the end of the day, you're your own person, you're an individual, and you don't have to follow in lockstep with your family. I'll be the first to let you know that, hands down. But I'm sorry to hear that, but definitely please reach out. Aberdeen said people have Stockholm and think they are grown-ups running things, and we just can't see the big picture. Hardlands Media's in the house. Keep speaking truth to power, Sabby. Hi, Kit. Thank you for the super chat, Prime 3. The enemy of the United States is the United States, not China, not Russia, not Cuba, nor Venezuela. Thank you for the super chat, Roger Meadows. Why Professor Wolff, sir? That sounds like a global coup. And thank you for the super chat, Big Bad Bro Chimichanga Taco. Sabs, every NATO country adds a percentage of their GDP to NATO. Over the years, $1 trillion. Yet, shouldn't they have plenty of munitions to fight a war? Oh, ammunitions to fight a war. The money doesn't even trickle down to arm a military. I don't know what they do with their money, but that's a good question. And thank you for the super chat, Roger. And through all of that, ND was insulated from all of it. North Dakota. That's right. North Dakota was not affected during the 2008 housing crisis because they have a public bank. We've talked a lot about public banking on here. Thank you for the super chat, Janice. Suicide hotline, dial 988. Yes, YepX. If you're still here, please call that number. I am concerned. Okay. All right. Let's go to our next story here. Krystal Ball. So Krystal is not happy. And we're going to get into that in just a second. But I want to show you one of the reasons why she is not happy. So this came out. The Washington Post published an article where they actually talked to the DNC. And I shared this on Twitter. I said, Democratic Party has no plans to sponsor primary debates. Hate to say I told you so, which I did. And I took a screenshot here and it says, some of the donors say they are expecting to be asked to organize future events to raise money for Biden's reelection. The National Democratic Party has said it will support Biden's reelection, and it has no plans to sponsor primary debates. And I told people this was going to happen. I think most of us knew that this was coming, right? So that is not good news, obviously, for candidates that are primary challenging Joe Biden, like Marianne Williamson, and for RFK Jr., because in order for the masses to hear what they have to say, they really need to be on that debate stage. They really do. And this is why some of the third party and independent candidates don't gain as much traction, because they're not on that debate stage. The last one I remember was Ross Perot. And it is still said to this day that he took votes away from George H.W. Bush Sr. That's how Clinton won. So after that, I really feel like whether it was the DNC or the GOP, somewhere along the way, they made some decisions and said, we got to make it much more difficult for independent candidates and third party candidates to get on that debate stage, but also primary candidates. Now, this is not the first time a sitting Democrat president has had a primary challenge. Jimmy Carter was primary challenged by Ted Kennedy That didn't go well for Ted. I saw an interview with Ted. It's still on YouTube. An interview with Ted Kennedy. And he was asked, why do you want to be president? And boy, did Ted fumble that question. He messed that question up. Anywho, Krystal had a conversation about this, and apparently there's something else that happened too that the Biden administration is doing, which is ridiculous. Again, I don't support either one of these parties. I'm not a Democrat or Republican. I left the Democratic Party after I got screwed over by Bernie Sanders twice in a row. I'm a registered independent, so I don't care either way. But just because I'm not a part of these parties, that doesn't mean that what the DNC is doing is correct. It's not correct. And I want you to hear what she had to say about this. Oh, I have some things to say.
Krystal, what are you taking a look at?
On the eve of Joe Biden's re-election announcement, one thing has become incredibly clear. The media does not want you to think you have any other options. In article after article, they declare that Biden has no, quote, serious primary opponent, as if that is up to them to decide. Their Democratic primary polls reflect laundry lists of candidates who have no intention of running, while leaving the actual declared candidates off of the list. And sometimes the media, they just outright lie, all in service of making sure that as much as the Democratic primary base wants to move on from Biden, they are not allowed to even evaluate the existing alternatives. The very same tactics they used against every anti-establishment Democratic candidate, from Bernie to Yang to Tulsi, they are all back with a vengeance. The media and the Democratic Party have spent the last 8 years waxing poetic about democracy, but at every turn, they show their contempt towards voters and the actual democratic process. No one has been more smeared and erased in this process than Marianne Williamson, and it's no accident that this effort has escalated just as she's begun to show a bit of real momentum. In recent weeks, Marianne has polled as high as 14% in battleground states, 10% nationally, over 20% with young voters. This enthusiasm of young voters has become particularly visible on their platform of choice, that would be TikTok. As Ryan Grimm documented, Williamson has become an outright sensation there. Her videos and fan accounts, they rack up millions of views, sharing her comments on politics, on life, and her critique of Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. The enthusiasm for Marianne by anyone on any platform, though, simply can't be tolerated by the Biden team and their allies who dare to call themselves journalists. Take a look at this article that was flagged by Katie Halper. Reuters wrote an entire piece that was supposed to be just a completely neutral listing of the current and potential 2024 contenders on both the Democratic and Republican sides. It's titled Fact Box 2024 U.S. presidential election. Who is in, who is out, and who is still thinking about it. But this so-called fact box contains the opposite of facts. They included everyone from Asa Hutchinson, who polls at 0%, to Chris Sununu, who polls at 0%, to Mike Pompeo, who polls at 0% and has already said he is not running. To my surprise, they actually did include RFK Jr., although
I'm going to pause here for a second because I did cover this article a couple of days ago when I told you guys, like, they included RFK Jr., but they did not bold. His name is not bold like the other names. And also the font is also smaller as well. So I covered that article the other day, but I have to say something really quick here because I understand why she's upset. But at the same time, it seems like she's somewhat surprised. And that's the part that really throws me, because having gone through both the Bernie elections, we remember what the media did to Bernie Sanders. We remember what the DNC did to Bernie Sanders. So it almost kind of sounds like, and I could be wrong, but in her voice, it sounds like she's somewhat surprised that this is happening again. And this is why I've always said you can change the candidate, but if they're running on those same type of progressive issues, it doesn't matter if it's Bernie Sanders or me. The DNC is going to try to do everything that they can to stop it. So that was the part that was kind of surprising to me. I'm just like, I expected all of this to happen and then some.
They weirdly didn't bold his name the way that they did all the other candidates for some reason. Conspicuously left off this list altogether, however, was Marianne Williamson, in spite of the fact that she is polling higher than the vast majority of contenders that they.
So, this is really about Marianne, not so much RFK Jr., because she said, listen to what she says here.
although they weirdly didn't bold his name the way that they did all the other candidates for some reason.
For some reason, but you know the reason. You know why they didn't do that. And it's not just that they didn't bold his name. Again, like I said, the font is smaller with RFK Jr. So there is no for some reason. The reason why they did it is because they don't want him to be visible, is because they don't want people to pay attention to him. The same reason why they did not include Marianne Williamson in that article to begin with in the first place. Now, later on, Reuters did go back and they did add Marianne Williamson's name after they got complaints. But last I checked, they didn't fix the issue that they had with RFK Jr.'s name. So there is no for some reason. This is the part that kind of like threw me for a loop. There is no for some reason. You know exactly the reason.
Conspicuously left off this list altogether, however, was Marianne Williamson, in spite of the fact that she is polling higher than the vast majority of contenders that they did bother to name. I simply cannot believe that someone who calls themselves a political journalist doesn't know who Marianne Williamson is. She's been in public life for decades. She was a candidate last time around as well. The only realistic explanation of this omission is that it was an intentional lie, motivated either by arrogant contempt towards Marianne or to curry favor with the Biden regime. Now,
and this is exactly why I continue to say, and those of us at RBN have said this before too, if the DNC is going to either ignore you or smear you, or they're going to try to cheat, remember the DNC lawsuit, or they're going to make it so that you cannot debate Joe Biden, which is also what they have said, which I just showed you, then what's the point of running through the Democratic Party? Because here's the thing. They're going to do that to independent candidates. But independent candidates know that going in. They do that to independent candidates. They do it to third party candidates. So if they're going to treat you the same way they're treating the independent and third party candidates, then you might as well just run outside the party. And all this time where people have been praising the so-called holier than thou Bernie Sanders, we could have built a strong third party movement. But we can't do that because people still want to play within the Democratic Party, the very same party that told Bernie Sanders basically to his face that, yeah, I know you want all those counties in West Virginia, but we're giving it to Hillary Clinton. This doesn't make any sense to me. That's why I just said this don't make no sense. I understand it's very hard and difficult for independent candidates. I totally get that. And people will come to me and say there's no chance they're going to win. I get that too. But I think I also got to throw, the fishing line back to you. And I got to tell you, there's no way these candidates are winning either. There's no way Marianne Williamson is going to win. There's no way RFK Jr. is going to win. The DNC will find a way, which they're already starting to do, to make it so that they do not become the president. They will make it so that they were not even, there's no way they're even going to let them get the nomination. And you say, well, how can that be? Go back to 2016. Look at Bernie Sanders. Look at what they did. Look at how they cheated Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders caved right in, went around this country campaigning and cheering for Hillary Clinton. After this party did him dirty, after the media did him dirty, then he turned around and he ran for president again and took money from working class people again. So that's my thing. That's why I said, if they're going to do all this to you, running in this party, then you might as well run outside the party. That's my point.
Marianne herself replied to this so-called journalist on Twitter asking, "Are you under the impression I do not exist or that I am not running?" Under pressure, Reuters was forced to do a stealth edit of the article to acknowledge that Marianne Williamson does in fact exist and is in fact running for president. As if it isn't enough that they ignore Marianne, unless they're smearing her, of course, the media's most damaging tactic is their acceptance and propagation of an anti-democracy status quo, especially when it comes to the Democratic Party. If the Republican Party was planning to have no debates and just simply to anoint Donald Trump, all of these supposed guardians of democracy, they would be rending their garments and melting down about authoritarianism and fascism. But when the DNC rigs the primary states for Biden and plans zero debates, they just accept this as a matter of course. Of course they would do this.
But to be honest, the progressives accept it too. Because if the progressives didn't accept it, they wouldn't continue to do this strategy. What was the accountability? What was the DNC fraud lawsuit? What did they say? That the DNC has the choice to pick candidates in the back room. That they had the choice to do what they did to Bernie Sanders. So The progressives also go along with this. You guys are playing their game. So this is, you play a game, you really need to win. We're not winning because we don't control the board. The DNC controls the board. So if this was checkers or chess, and you're asking who controls the board, the DNC controls the board. So it doesn't matter if you move your rook or your bishop or your pawn or your king. Because the DNC controls the board, you're still going to lose. It don't matter how many pieces you have or what pieces you move. That's a big part of the problem.
Post turned in a perfect example of this with their big article about Biden getting set to announce his reelect. In it, they assert with zero judgment that, quote, the National Democratic Party has said it will support Biden's reelection and it has no plans to sponsor primary debates. They go on to offer the standard line about how Biden faces no, quote, serious challenge. This total shutdown on public debate is even more detrimental to democracy since Biden has sat for far fewer interviews and held fewer press conferences than any president since Ronald Reagan. He remains in hiding from the American people and the press. They just accept it. Democracy dies in darkness, right, guys? When Marianne does get coverage, it shows why the press and the Biden team are so desperate to hide her very existence. In a recent cable news appearance, one of the rare times she was actually invited on since launching her bid, she had a lot to say about elite Democratic failures. Take a listen.
I think that one of the things we've talked about here already is that things are not okay. We have 39% of Americans who now report, 44% of millennials, that they have skipped meals in order to pay their rent. We have 1 in 4 Americans who live with medical debt. We have 64% of Americans who are living paycheck to paycheck. 60% of Americans who could not absorb a $400 unexpected expenditure. Look at those facets that I just talked to you about, and you talked to me about mental health. We talk about the mental health crisis. We need to talk about what's at the root of that, and to talk about how much of that comes from chronic economic anxiety. We have a political class. We have a political class that is not planning any fundamental economic reform. And I'm running for president. I'm running as a Democrat because incremental change is not enough. When you have a lack of universal health care, although we have it in every other advanced democracy has tuition-free college, which we had until the 1960s. I'm old enough, Allison. There was a time in this faraway land called the 1970s when the average American, there was a thriving middle class. The average American worker had decent benefits, could afford a home, could afford a car, could afford a yearly vacation, could afford to send one parent one parent could stay home if they wished, and they could afford to send their kids to college. So no, people are not okay. And I'm running for president because we need a fundamental economic U-turn, not just incremental change. People need to have health care in this country, need to be able to go to college. People need the bandwidth to thrive. And if all a politician can say is, I'll help you survive an unjust system in the richest country in the world, something is wrong. We need someone from outside that system to say the system should not be unjust. We need an economic U-turn, and that's what I will do if I'm elected president.
Now, that clip has already racked up hundreds of thousands of views on TikTok. So you won't be surprised to learn Biden team trying to silence her there as well. According to Marianne campaign volunteer Tim Cox, TikTok moderators have banned at least 2 Marianne supporter accounts. Marianne Williams.
Why do you want to run in this party? You guys see what the problem is here? So the Biden administration has had their hand in this where they're banning videos that she had on TikTok. I'm not even voting for Marianne Williamson. But what I'm saying is that why do you want to do this? Why do you want to run in this party? Look at how they're treating you. Let me let this finish because I have something else to say at the end.
And for Prez and Lefty Takeover. These accounts had tens of thousands of followers, no terms of service violations, but they were spammed by Biden supporters, mass reporting them, according to Cox. Now, I spoke with the woman who runs the Marianne Williamson for Prez account, and she confirmed that this had indeed happened. She told me that, quote, the account is still banned, and I have not heard a single peep back from TikTok on why they took my account down. I broke no rules. These heavy-handed tactics reveal a Biden team much more nervous than their public bluster would have you believe. Now, look, no one's going to deny it is exceptionally difficult to oust any incumbent president. However, this one does have some real vulnerabilities. Don't take my word for it. Just ask the voters. 73% of voters wish the current president would not run again. That includes a majority of Democrats.
Right, but that doesn't matter. Like it says here, but they'll probably vote for him anyway, even if they don't vote for him. I want to be very clear here. The problem that I have is not so much the candidates. Do I have disagreements on certain policy issues with RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson? Absolutely, which I've told you guys about. But at its core, the problem is the system. The problem is the Democratic Party is controlled by corporations. That's why they would never let a Bernie Sanders win. You think they're going to let someone win who wants to give everyone health care in this country? That is never, I used to believe that. I used to believe it. I fell for it too. I gave Bernie Sanders a lot of money. And I met people who gave Bernie Sanders money that they honestly, they really didn't have the money to give him. Where their choice was, let me pay my bill, or do I give Bernie Sanders money because Bernie's going to get us health care? They gave Bernie Sanders that money. Bernie Sanders had a way of appealing to the working class, a lot of people who were non-voters. You will never, and I want to be very clear here, it is going to be very difficult to gather that same type of energy that Bernie Sanders had. And I would argue that if you're trying to win people over this time around, you have to be bigger than Bernie Sanders was. You see what I'm saying? Because Bernie Sanders at one often points was polling like number one in the polls, had thousands of people come to his events. When he came to Boston, there were over 10,000 people there. I was one of the people there. So I know the type of turnout that Bernie Sanders had. And what I'm trying to explain to people is this: in order to have that same type of energy and momentum that Bernie Sanders had in 2020 and 2016, the next person is going to have to overperform. They're going to have to do more than what Bernie did just to get the same type of energy, because so many people have been disheartened by what Bernie Sanders did. And here he is right now telling people he will do everything that he can to make sure that Joe Biden is reelected. The squad has already said they are backing Joe Biden. So if the squad is going along with Biden, Bernie Sanders is going along with Biden, you got Ro Khanna and Pramila Jayapal going along with Joe Biden, you don't even have regressives in Congress backing Marianne Williamson. So we're supposed to believe that somehow she's going to get to the place that Bernie Sanders couldn't, and she has less support. There's no way. And I will not let people go through this again. I will not. I will not sit up here and tell people, yes, go canvass for them. Yes, go volunteer. No, I'm not going to do that again. I still have people mad at me from 2020 because how Bernie turned and said, just go ahead and vote for Joe Biden. When we had a movement, we had thousands and thousands of people in this country to actually have a real mass movement of working class people to shake the system. And Bernie Sanders walked away from all of that in the end and told you to vote for Joe Biden. He did that twice in a row, where he told you to vote for his corporate opponent. And then I'm supposed to believe that these other candidates are going to say, no way, man. They have to sign a pledge. They have to sign a pledge. What happens when all this is done? Let me get back to the video, and we're going to talk about what happens when it's over. Sorry.
Only 1/3 of voters believe Biden deserves to be reelected, and majorities disapprove of his handling on every major issue that was tested in a recent CNN poll. Majorities say he is not honest, does not care about people like them, and cannot work effectively with Congress. But while Americans might be dissatisfied with Biden across a range of issues, the biggest questions are about his basic capacity to serve in the office at all. 65% say he doesn't inspire confidence, and 67% say he doesn't have the stamina and sharpness to serve effectively as president of the United States.
That doesn't matter. They'll prop him up with uppers. They will help him perform like they're helping him perform now, from what I believe. Because he's not the only president that we've had in this country that has had some type of, whether it was cognitive decline or medical issues, and the public didn't know about it until after the fact, until after they were no longer president. None of this matters. Like, I can tell this to people all day long. I can say, Joe Biden has cognitive decline. You shouldn't vote for him. I can say this all day long. But as long as there's that Trump derangement syndrome, as long as mainstream media is supporting him, the majority of Americans don't even watch independent media. The majority of Americans watch CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. That's the reality of the situation. I can say this all day, but as long as people have that Trump derangement syndrome, oh my God, we may get Trump again, people will still vote for him, even though they don't want him there. So that's a big part of the problem. Even if it's a lower turnout, even if that means that the Democratic Party has to lose and the Republicans win, the DNC is never going to let anyone running on these progressive issues get through. And I'm not going to sit up here and lie to you guys and make you think there's a chance. There is no chance. I'm sorry. Let's just keep it real. For people who ask me, what about third party independent? They don't have a chance either. We know this. That's not the strategy. The idea with third party and independent candidates is that you build a movement, and unlike Bernie Sanders, because you already know you're not going to win, you build a movement. When your election is over, you continue that movement. All you need is 5% to get the federal funding. You get that. Then we talk about organizing with unions. You get that candidate to work with the unions, like Shama Sawant says, workers strike back. You mobilize with those people. You mobilize the working class, and you start a real class movement in this country that is not just based on your campaign, but you use the campaign to get the issues and the message across, and then you educate people about doing mutual aid, about doing direct action. That's what we need in this country. This is why Shama Sawant started Workers Strike Back. Give me a break. These politicians don't want to help these workers. That's why you have regressives in Congress voting against railroad workers trying to go on strike. They don't care about us. A lot of these politicians are millionaires. Joe Manchin is a freaking millionaire. Nancy Pelosi is a millionaire. These people don't care about no workers. They just trying to get paid and make sure that they have substantial wealth that they can pass down and create generational wealth for the rest of their family. Let's keep it real.
Who can blame them for wondering if the oldest U.S. president in history is really up to the task?
So thank you all. God bless you all. Let's go lick the world. Let's get it done. Representative Jackie, are you here? Where's Jackie? I didn't think she was going to be here. More than half the women in my cabinet, more than half the people in my cabinet, more than half the women in my administration are women. I'll either roll an egg or being the guy who's pushing them out. Come on, help her.
And so Biden's cronies don't want to contrast with anyone who can articulate a perspective and who is unafraid to expose the failures of the elite political and media class. I am reminded that Dianne Feinstein was able to hold on for her last re-election by avoiding interviews, debates, town halls, anything that would expose her to constituents just how unable to do the job she really was. The Biden camp here is similarly desperate to hide their guy and persuade everyone that there is no actual contest. Whatever you think, any of these candidates, Biden, RFK Jr., and Marianne, at the very least, we deserve actual debates. Demand that the Democratic Party live up to the bare minimum of their pro-democracy rhetoric.
It's just like these same criticisms that I'm hearing from Krystal. I heard her say this about Bernie Sanders. It's the same thing, man. It's the same thing. Mainstream media is ignoring Bernie Sanders. I heard her and Sagar talk about this on Rising. It's like nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. This is why those of us at RBN, what do we tell you to do? For people who say, well, you can't just vent and do nothing. We tell you to mobilize with people in your community. We tell you when it comes to, or I tell you at least when it comes to politics, you might want to focus on local politics more than national politics. That's why I have that section on my channel about the ballot initiatives for the different states. You can accomplish some of these progressive policies through your own state. No, it's not easy, but people have already done it. We've done it multiple times here in Massachusetts. While people are still sitting around waiting on the federal government to give you a $15 minimum wage, it's already passed in the states. While people are waiting around for the federal government to legalize cannabis, it's already passed in a lot of these states. While people are waiting around for this millionaire tax to happen, it passed in Massachusetts. So what I'm saying is this. You cannot just focus on what you can do on the national level, because when you do that, you're missing what you can do on the local level. And local politics, in my opinion, matters even more. Don't believe me? Look at what's happening with Roe v. Wade. Look at the states that are implementing the stricter abortion laws. That's local. That's not the federal government. Organize with people in your community. Organize with people who are trying to unionize. Do mutual aid with people in your community. That is how we are going to build a strong community and coalition with people in this country. It is not going to be through Marianne or RFK Jr. or Bernie Sanders, any of them people, because at the end of the day, they're not in our community. You know the needs of your community. Bernie don't, RFK Jr. don't, Marianne don't. And the reality is, these things still have to pass. Some people got mad at me when I explained to you that David Pakman, although annoying, David Pakman was actually correct that Medicare for all would not pass. Because if you look at the logistics of it, in order for Medicare for all to pass, you have to still have the votes for it. So even if Bernie Sanders chose to do it by executive order, then it comes down to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court can overturn Medicare for all. How can they do that? Because unless you come out and make private insurance, not unaffordable, but illegal, private insurance illegal, the Supreme Court can come in and overturn that. This is the message that Bernie Sanders didn't tell you. This is the message that a lot of the progressive media did not tell us. All the other things that go along with this. So this is why I'm saying, unless you get corporate money out of electoral politics, these progressive policies are going to be very difficult to pass. As long as you have politicians taking money from Big Pharma, as long as Blue Cross Blue Shield controls the Democratic Party, as long as Raytheon and Lockheed Martin control these parties, these things are not going to pass. You can call me a nihilist, you can call me a pessimist, but I call myself a realist, and I'm just giving it to you straight. Now, for people who do want to do the national focus, what should the priority be? The priority should be building some type of coalition to remove corporate money from electoral campaigns. That's what you should be focused on. Who's doing that right now? There's an organization called Move to Amend. I recommend that you follow them. Follow Move to Amend, because that's one of the things that they have been trying to do. So you have to get the electoral campaigns removed from the corporate money. If you don't get the corporate money out, we will have this conversation every election cycle until it finally gets through to people's heads that this is not going to happen.
And Sagar, it's just amazing to me that they feel so entitled to decide for themselves who's a serious candidate, that they just leave her out entirely and think that's totally fine. Don't include. Hey guys, ready or not?
Yeah, we're not even going to talk about entitlement because Krystal used her own entitlement and told people to grow up because they didn't want to do this strategy. So we're not even going to talk about entitlement. But the fact of the matter is that here we go again. I heard the same thing with Bernie Sanders. And I'm sorry, but not falling for that again. And you shouldn't fall for it either. It's a hot mess. They won't even let them debate. What that tell you? And like I said, I don't even agree with it, but I still think they should be able to debate. Now, that being said, Joe Biden has announced that he is running for re-election, and he did release his ad, and this ad is cringe. Hold on to your seats for this one.
Freedom. Personal freedom is fundamental to who we are as Americans.
There's nothing more important, nothing more sacred.
That's been the work of my first term, to fight for our democracy.
This shouldn't be a red or blue issue.
Freedom and democracy. Let's talk about that real quick. He said, his point of his first term is to fight for freedom and democracy. If you were really trying to fight for democracy, you wouldn't make it so difficult for third party and independent candidates to get on the ballot. If you were really trying to fight for democracy, you would be willing to debate your primary challengers, Joe Biden. You should tell the DNC, no, that's not fair. I'll debate them. You're not really trying to fight for no democracy. The democracy that he's talking about is to get people to go out to the ballot box and vote for the Democratic Party. That's it. That's what he's talking about. Freedom. Most of you are not free. I told you a couple of nights ago that you think you have rights in this country, but you really don't. Most of you are not free. If you're poor, if you're working class, you are not free. How are you free if your health insurance is tied to your job? How are you free? How are you free in a country that doesn't want to even give you health care unless your employer offers it? How are you free? How are you free if you can't even pay your electric bill? That's free? You're not free. Most of you are not free. You think you got freedom. You don't really have freedom. Like I told you before, you have a pass that they give you until they want to take it away.
To protect our rights, to make sure that everyone in this country is treated equally and that everyone is given a fair shot at making it.
Everyone treated equally. Then in that case, everyone should have health care.
But you know, around the country, MAGA extremists are lining up to take on those bedrock freedoms, cutting Social Security that you paid for your entire life while cutting taxes for the very wealthy, dictating what health care decisions women can make, banning books, and telling people who they can love.
Some of those Democrats also dictated those healthcare decisions that women could make. Henry Cuellar was one of them. Tim Kaine also was anti-pro-choice. So let's just keep it real. The Democratic Party had time to codify Roe v. Wade into law. They chose not to.
All while making it more difficult for you to be able to vote. When I ran for president 4 years ago, I said we're in a battle for the soul of America, and we still are. The question we're facing is whether in the years ahead we have more freedom or less freedom, more rights or fewer.
We have less, but part of that is not just because of the Republican Party, it's also because of the Democratic Party too, because you guys didn't do the things that you were supposed to do when you had majorities in the House and in the Senate.
I know what I want the answer to be, and I think you do too. This is not a time to be complacent. That's why I'm running for re-election. Because I know America. I know we're good and decent people. I know we're still a country that believes in honesty and respect and treating each other with dignity. That we're a nation where we give hate no safe harbor. We believe that everyone is equal, that everyone should be given a fair shot to succeed.
No, we really don't. I'm sorry. It's just when he says we believe everyone is equal. No, we really don't. Some people do, but look at the way our government treats certain people.
In this country. Thank you for choosing us. Every generation of Americans has faced a moment when they have to defend democracy. Stand up for our personal freedom. Stand up for the right to vote and our civil rights.
Look, guys, he's finally doing the civil rights march that he claimed that he did many years ago.
And this is our moment. So if you're with me, go to joebiden.com and sign up. Let's finish this job. I know we can, because this is the United States of America. There's nothing, simply nothing we cannot do if we do it together.
Nothing in that advertisement showed accomplishments. Did you guys notice that? It was all just running on vibes, bro. Just vibes, bro. Just vibes. Oh my God. It's crazy, man. God, I hope people don't fall for this again. John says, Sabby, where did you find this Clare Daly video? It was on Twitter. The first one was on Twitter. The second one is on YouTube. Thank you for the super chat, Cool Blue. While Krystal and her ilk sheepdog viewers to vote for the Democratic Party in general elections, she actually makes a case for rejecting Team Blue. That's the other thing, too, is at the end of the day, like they're all going to tell you to vote for Joe Biden. You know, it's just, ain't nobody got time for that. Thank you for the super chat, Robbie Rod. Now it's the Biden regime. Zero says, I want a Sabby shirt with the cartoon line drawing of her saying, let's go on. I have a Sabby shirt with a cartoon on my, I don't think it says that. No, I think it just says Sabby Sabs. I can show it to you guys later, but I do have one of those. Thank you for the super chat, Delthea. Marianne Williamson is running as a Democrat because she will protect the Dem party as soon as she gets the order. If she was against the party machine, she'd run independent, period. Afro Man's running as an independent. And no, he's not high. He made that statement on his own. Thank you for the super chat, Justin. 100% soaking truth, Sabby. The only chance to get someone like Bernie elected is running as a green, hands down. Thank you for the super chat, Delthea. Marianne Williamson talks real good, but where is her political alliance? How many established politicos are marching with her? Where is her on the ground movement? I don't know. That's a good question, Delthea. Thank you for the super chat, Lorez. Mental decline, Woodrow Wilson. So wife took over on the DL. Woodrow Wilson, there was another one too. I forget which one had polio. I thought one of the presidents had polio and his wife was. Thank you for the super chat. None of your business. There are more of us than them. We can elect anyone. Independents outnumber either party. Thank you for the super chat, Pavel. Support your ways of questioning and analyzing politics. Keep it up. Thank you. And thank you for the super chat, Seeking Freedom. Get those likes up, folks, because Mama is cooking preach. That's right. Hit that like button, guys. And thank you for the super chat, Tom. It makes me sick how he basically just uses black people as props, and most will fall for that BS all over again. Yep. This is true. All right, we're going on to our final story. So if you have not heard, I'm pretty sure most of you probably have. Tucker Carlson and Don Lemon, both out. Both of them, right? We're going to start off with Don Lemon because it's interesting. I was on Rising not too long ago when I did say that I think CNN has been giving Don Lemon a pass. I felt like they were afraid to fire him. And it's because of numerous behaviors that he's had, right? So there was the comment that he made about Nikki Haley being or not being in her prime. There was that comment. There was the Jussie Smollett case where he actually contacted Jussie Smollett and warned him that the Chicago PD did not believe his story. I didn't think that was journalist integrity. I didn't think that was ethical journalism, although I guess we don't even call him a journalist or whatever. Either way, that was wrong. He's had sexual assault allegations against him before as well. There's just been a lot with Don Lemon, but his behavior has been a problem, apparently, at CNN. And I think Don, over the years, as he became bigger, I think that he became a little bit too comfortable. I think Don got a little too cozy and thought that he was invincible when it came to being held accountable. That is no longer the case. Don is out. Case Study QB was able to capture part of that announcement. So let's dive in.
I want to share with you some important news right here at our own network. CNN's Oliver Darcy is back with us. Oliver, what do you know?
Some shocking news. Again, John, in the world of cable news, Don Lemon and CNN have parted ways. This is according to a memo that was sent out to CNN employees just moments ago. I'll read to you part of it, John. Actually, most of it. It says, CNN and Don have parted ways. Don will forever be a part of the CNN family, and we thank him for his contributions over the past 17 years. We wish him well, and we will be cheering him on in his future endeavors. And then it goes on to say that the network is committed to the morning show CNN This Morning, which, of course, is hosted or was hosted by Don Lemon, as well as Caitlin Collins and Poppy Harlow. Now, this statement is coming from CNN CEO Chris Licht. It does not detail what happened, what led to Don's departure, but Don Lemon is no longer with CNN, according to this memo that just went out to CNN employees, John.
That was going to be my follow-up, as it was in the Tucker Carlson case when we announced that he is leaving Fox, or he and Fox have parted ways. At the top of the show was the why, but it's clear from that we don't have any more information on that, correct?
Not at the moment, John, but rest assured, once I get out of here, I will be making some calls.
Oliver Darcy, appreciate the hustle very much on this breaking news story. And again, I don't know the details happening while I'm sitting in the chair here, but I work here. I love this place. I certainly wish Don the best. He's always been good to me as a colleague.
You know, he had to say that, right? I work here. I love this place, because he's like, look, I don't know what happened with Don, but I don't want to lose my gig. Okay. I am very happy here, guys, at CNN, but had to be an awkward moment for him to make that announcement on CNN, and he didn't even know that happened. And you know, thoughts just go through your head, and you start to wonder if you're next, right? So of course he had to let people know, I love it here. Now, CNN did issue a statement. Oh, hold on. Where's the Don Lemon statement? Uh-oh. Don Lemon actually issued a statement. Let me see if I can find it. No? I'm sorry, guys. I don't know what happened to... Let me just go here and pull it up. Okay, here it is. Okay, so this is how I found out about it. Don Lemon issued this statement. I was informed this morning by my agent that I have been terminated by CNN. I am stunned. After 17 years at CNN, I would have thought that someone in management would have had the decency to tell me directly. At no time was I ever given an indication that I would not be able to continue to do the work I have loved at the network. It is clear that there are some larger issues at play. With that said, I want to thank my colleagues and the many teams I have worked with for an incredible run. They are the most talented journalists in the business, and I wish them all the best. I don't know if I would call them journalists. Not sure I would call them that. Okay. Commentators, not journalists. And it was really weird to me that he posted this screenshot, because if he could have just typed this out with the blue check, because you get you actually get more characters with the blue check. So he could have just typed that out with the Twitter blue. But yeah, it was a little dramatic for me, you know, right? So that was actually how I found out. I saw that tweet in my feed. So that is Don Lemon's version of events. CNN actually responded to that tweet that Don Lemon had. And I want to show you what they had to say, because it's a little bit different. Their version of events, Don Lemon's statement about this morning events is inaccurate. He was offered an opportunity to meet with management, but instead released a statement on Twitter. I don't. So, they seem to disagree. Now, I do want to add something in reference to him being shocked by this. I don't think he should have been shocked. A while back, when he was removed from the primetime spot and they decided to put him a part of the morning show, I told people back then, I was like, oh, so he got demoted. You can get demoted in different ways. You can be demoted and not have a pay cut, but your position is less than it was before, or you can get demoted by having a pay cut. Don Lemon proceeded to tell people that he was not demoted. This was just a change of events. They had new management. They wanted to try new things. But for those of us that have worked in broadcast media, I've interned in broadcast media. My background is broadcast journalism from undergrad. Any of us can tell you, anytime you are removed from a primetime spot and you are positioned in a morning show, that's considered a demotion when it comes to broadcast journalism. Why? The primetime show receives more views. It usually has higher ratings. CNN's ratings were down. We were talking about this right after Biden won. Their ratings did tank, right? So that being said, when you were relocated to the morning show, that is not a show that is watched by as many people. So I still say that was a demotion. So I don't know why he was surprised so much to speak, but he was. But that announcement came after this next announcement. Before Don Lemon decided to speak out, I saw this announcement about Tucker Carlson, that Tucker Carlson left Fox News. And so I'm thinking to myself, like, what is going on? What is happening in media? Listen to this announcement here. Shout out to Case Study QB, because before CNN made Tucker Carlson's announcement, Don Lemon's announcement, they made Tucker Carlson's announcement.
Just in to CNN. Tucker Carlson is out at Fox News. The right-wing network just announced the two have parted ways. CNN senior media reporter Oliver Darcy is here with more on this. What are you learning? He was out on Friday. Will we see him say goodbye?
We're not going to see him say goodbye. This is really stunning news coming from Fox. They say his last show was April 21st. They put out a very short statement. They said they thank him for his service, and that's it. That's all we know right now. But of course, this comes days after. Last week, you remember, Fox News settled this massive defamation lawsuit with Dominion Voting Systems over the election lies that it promoted in the wake of the 2020 election. So they paid out $787 million, the highest known defamation settlement ever publicly known in U.S. media. So this is coming days after that. Unclear, of course, whether this is related. It's kind of hard to imagine that these things happen. Tucker Carlson was sowing doubts about the U.S. election results just up until the last few weeks. So it's possible that there is a relationship there, but really big news. And I should also point out that they've stuck with them really through quite a lot. Like he has promoted conspiracy theories about the vaccines. He has said things that are just blatantly anti-immigrant. He has, like I said, promoted doubts about the 2020 election. They have stuck with them throughout all of this. So, really shocking news that now he's no longer with the network.
Yeah, the big question, as you say, is why now? Fox has let their number one people go before. I mean, Bill O'Reilly, they pushed out when he was number one. They're doing this now with Tucker Carlson. We talk about this happening in the wake of the Dominion decision. Now, it's interesting with Carlson, which is that it wasn't his show or his shows that Dominion was suing over necessarily for promoting false news. It was some of his behind-the-scenes stuff that was legally problematic for Fox, but he wasn't one of the people who helped get them in trouble with Dominion, was he?
No, he wasn't.
Yeah, this is one of the things that happened as well. Just remember that Fox News just settled that lawsuit with Dominion. I think they paid them over $700 million. So just keep that in mind. But that's actually, based on the information I received today, that's actually not the reason why he left or was fired. I'm hearing all different things. Some people are saying fired. Some people are saying that he left on his own. Some people are saying they parted ways. But for him to not have a final show, it points more towards like he was fired in a sense.
The main culprit that really spawned this lawsuit. But, it's not to say also that other hosts could not be eventually leaving the network as well. I mean, this raises a lot of questions about whether the network potentially is trying to at least rein in some of the more extreme people on the channel. I mean, of course, Tucker Carlson, the most extreme probably on that channel. I should also note, John, why this is so important. I mean, Tucker Carlson outside Donald Trump really was the person commanding the GOP, really directing it. You saw Republican lawmakers, prominent Republican lawmakers, often grovel at his feet. Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz, for instance, groveled at his feet, and others because they were afraid of him going on his primetime show and lashing out at them. So this is not only huge news in the world of media, but also in the world of politics, where he was really pushing the GOP in that extremist direction.
And it's also, just to that point, his show is also a place that a lot of Republican lawmakers or anyone who wanted to speak to Donald Trump would go in order to send their message, because they knew that Donald Trump would be watching and so closely tracking that show in and of itself. Do we know where he was in his contract? Are they going to be able to say that this was, end of his contract, they just wanted to try something different?
I'm not sure. I mean, I have been reaching out. I have also reached out to Tucker Carlson and everyone trying to get more information on this. But this is a very short statement. Also, notably, there's no statement from Tucker Carlson in here.
Right.
It doesn't seem, if I had to guess, that they parted ways amicably. We'll be obviously looking for more information in the hours.
Okay, so what I do want to say is that I'm assuming that at some point in time, Tucker Carlson is going to probably do an interview, a sit-down interview with someone, probably someone well-known, a prominent figure, explaining what happened, if he's allowed to. I don't know if he signed an NDA. Like, those are not uncommon in media, by the way. But if he signed an NDA, he may not be able to disclose everything that happened. That being said, there have been a number of speculations. And before I show you what was sent to me, Eric, I'm ready for that second screen whenever you are. Before I show you what was sent to me today and how this involves a billionaire, surprise, surprise, I want to show you some of the things that people pointed to that they said is probably the reason why he was removed. Let me see. Eric, do you have that second screen? Oh, here we go. So this came from Alex Rubenstein. He said Tucker Carlson, of all people at the Heritage Foundation of all places, denounces the DOJ for its prosecution of the African People's Socialist Party. Now, we talked about this a couple of days ago when he also had Glenn Greenwald on the show, and he talked about what happened with the Uhuru movement and how they were unjustly charged. Some people felt like maybe this was the reason. Listen to this.
The week I started at Policy Review, the Soviet Union collapsed, which was an amazing thing. The coup against Gorbachev in the third week of August 1991 was the week I started at Heritage. And in retrospect, of course, you never appreciate the significance of things as they happen to you. You can't really know what the movie's about until it ends. But at the time, we didn't really appreciate how, well, two things. One, our entire political orientation was based on this war between the United States and the Soviet Union, this Cold War, but very much a war. And every part of our politics, as you well remember, those of you my age and older remember, every part of our politics revolved around that central conflict. That's the first lesson of history. Nothing is permanent except our own demise and God. But we didn't kind of get that. If you told me then that this week the Department of Justice would have indicted a group of people I don't agree with, by the way, on a lot of different issues, Black nationalist socialists from Florida, okay, kind of not my demographic, but would have indicted them for criticizing the U.S. position, the Biden administration's position on the war in Ukraine, and charged them with felonies for which they're each facing 10 years in prison. If you told me that could happen here, I would have laughed at you. No, we have a First Amendment. That can't happen here, but it has, that and a lot of other things, which are gravely unsettling, actually, and people who were rooted in the Cold War story and the reality of the Cold War, again, my age, 53, kind of know where that goes.
Was that the reason? Or was there another reason? Some people are saying that maybe it had something to do with this statement that he made on this podcast called the Full Send podcast, where he criticized mainstream media. Could this have been the reason?
Like, I've spent my whole life in the media. My dad was in the media. Like, that is a big part of the revelation that's changed my life, is the media are part of the control apparatus. Like, there's no, yeah, I know. Cause you're younger and smarter and you're like, yeah. But what if you're me and you spent your whole life in that world And to look around and all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow. Not only are they part of the problem, but I spent most of my life being part of the problem, defending the Iraq war. Like I actually did that. Can you imagine if you did that?
Well, what do you think? What is one of your biggest regrets in your career?
Oh, defending the Iraq war.
That is it?
Well, I've had a million regrets, not being more skeptical, calling people names when I should have listened to what they were saying. Look, when someone makes a claim, there's only one question that's important at the very beginning, which is the claim true or not? So I say, you committed murder or you rigged the last election. Before you attack me as a crazy person for saying that, maybe you should explain whether you did it or not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And for too long, I participated in the culture where I was like, anyone who thinks outside these pre-prescribed lanes is crazy, is a conspiracy theorist. And I just really regret that. I'm ashamed that I did that. And partly it was age, partly it was the world that I grew up in. So when you look at me and you're like, yeah, of course they're part of the means of control. I'm like, that's obvious to you because you're 28, but I just didn't see it at all. And I'm ashamed of that.
Isn't that what the media tries to do, though?
It's their only purpose.
Right.
They're not here to inform you. Really? Even on the big things that really matter, like the economy and war and COVID and like things that really matter that will affect you. No, their job is not to inform you. They are working for the small group of people who actually run the world. They're their servants. They're their Praetorian Guard. And we should treat them with maximum contempt because they have earned it.
Was that the reason? The fact that he called out mainstream media and he's a part of the media? The fact that he said the media is working for a small group of people that control the world? Was that what did him in? Now, there's more because you have to keep in mind that even though you may not like Tucker Carlson, he had the #1 show. It was the most watched show. Why would they get rid of someone who has the most watched show, right? Some people are speculating it had something to do with this conversation between AOC and Jen Psaki.
Federal regulation in terms of what's allowed on air and what isn't. And when you look at what Tucker...
Let me go back to the beginning. Could this be the reason?
Federal regulation in terms of what's allowed on air and what isn't. And when you look at what Tucker Carlson and some of these other folks on Fox do, it is very, very clearly incitement of violence. Very clearly incitement of violence. And that is the line that I think we have to be willing to contend with. Federal regulation in terms of what's allowed on air and what isn't.
Could it be that AOC had something to do with this? She's talking about federal regulations about what's allowed on air and what isn't. So this is what I had to say. Because when I heard this, I was like, really? I said, Tucker leaves Fox News, #1 news show in the country is done. Interesting. But this was even more interesting because I also noticed that right after that announcement, Fox stock started to crash. Look at this. Right after that announcement, you see that sharp drop right there? Right after that announcement. Apparently Tucker was more important to Fox than they may have realized. Anytime the stock just drops like that. And I know they made the comparison with Bill O'Reilly, but I don't know, man. Now, here's the information that came my way earlier today. Shout out to Kim for this. And then I found the article. Kim actually got a little bit more scoop. She said, make Trump a non-person. Rupert Murdoch declared Fox News was going all in on Ron DeSantis. Murdoch is a DeSantis mega donor. See, this is why I tell you to follow the money. Gave him a book deal and insisted the network pivot from Trump, which he admitted, given the viewers, wouldn't be easy. Is this why Tucker was fired? Now, this piece right here, Rupert Murdoch. So Rupert Murdoch, he is a media mogul. He's a billionaire. Hold that thought. Hold on to his name, because we're going to show you something else in reference to him as well. But it sounds like to me that Fox this time around had decided we are going to push Ron DeSantis instead of Donald Trump. Now, does Tucker Carlson, is he necessarily a Trumper, so to speak? You might be surprised. Kim says Tucker wasn't a mega Trumper, but he was willing to expose the establishment's systemic attack on Trump and their disinformation campaign to keep Trump from the White House. By exposing them, Tucker sowed more doubt in our institutions than any other news broadcaster. That's probably one of the reasons why he was popular, by the way. By doing so, he helped Trump's campaign more effectively than any other outlet. With Tucker around calling out the lies, it would be harder to continue pulling the wool over American people's eyes. Our government and the elites despise us. They think they know better than us, and they're going to ensure an event like Trump winning never happens again. They're in charge, and by firing Tucker, they reminded us of this. Now remember, Rupert Murdoch is a billionaire. But here's a little bit more information. Carlson fired on Murdoch's orders. Report says as it happened. So it was Rupert Murdoch who wanted to get rid of Tucker Carlson. I'm just going to go straight to the point here. We don't have to go through this entire article. Most of it is a recap of what I just told you. So let's go on here. Many were surprised. Not that part. Yada, 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 yada. Where might Tucker go next? I don't want that part either. Where did it go? Sorry. I just want to make sure I'm going to the right part here. Lemon's ouster came, that's Don Lemon. Lemon's ouster came weeks after he apologized for a sexist remark about Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley. She was clearly pleased by the anchor's dismissal. News of Carlson's departure was greeted with cheers by panelists on The View, a show that's been critical of him in the past. So Brian Stelter, you guys remember him? Remember he was removed from CNN? That guy was ridiculous. Anyway, to be clear, Fox News did not know that CNN was terminating Don Lemon today, and CNN did not know that Fox was ousting Tucker Carlson. This was a complete and crazy coincidence. That's another thing that people were wondering as well. But this is the big one, guys. Ding, 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 ding. Carlson fired on Murdoch's orders over discrimination suit. Fox chairman Rupert Murdoch ordered Tucker Carlson's firing over a discrimination lawsuit filed by a former producer on his show. Murdoch was also concerned about Carlson's insistence that undercover government agents were involved in, you guys gonna read this part here, I can't say it on YouTube, an allegation that has no factual basis. In March, Abby Grossberg, a producer who formerly worked on Carlson's show, filed a suit saying that lawyers for the network coached and intimidated her into giving misleading testimony in the lawsuit filed by Dominion Voting Systems. She also alleged a culture of sexism and misogyny at the network, and that executives tried to blame her and host Maria Bartiromo for the airing of the 2020 election. You guys can read that there. So this woman here, Abby Grossberg, apparently she is claiming that she was forced to give misleading testimony, and also that there was a culture of sexism and misogyny at the network. Now, she wouldn't be the first to talk about the sexism and misogyny. Let's remember Megyn Kelly. Remember Megyn Kelly talked about this, about her experience when she worked at Fox News. There was a movie about this. There was a whole movie. I think Nicole Kidman was one of the characters, where they talked about some of the women reporters at Fox News and some of the behavior that they had experienced. So this wouldn't be the first time we've heard something like this. And I'm sure it's not just Fox News that it happens at. But it appears this is the big ding, 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 ding. Yes, thank you, Deneen. Bombshell, that's the name of the movie. Thank you. So she apparently filed the suit in March, and it's now April. So that was just last month. So it goes on to say, while the Times reports that the dismissal wasn't related to the Dominion lawsuit, it notes that comments made about managers at the network, which were revealed in the case's discovery process, may have also played a role in his ousting. So there you go. I'm sure there's more to this story. I'm sure, like I said, at some point, Tucker Carlson is going to sit down and give an exclusive interview with someone. Who that someone will be, I do not know. And maybe you'll hear more from him if you can. Like I said, it's not uncommon to sign an NDA in media. So we don't know how much he'll be able to tell. But the reality is this: Tucker Carlson had the #1 show. Whether you like him or not, a lot of people like to watch him. And it wasn't just conservatives. There were Democrats that watched Tucker Carlson as well. Some people watched him to hear the anti-war or the anti-Ukraine Russia war rhetoric, because he's not anti-war when it came to China. But what I will say is this: Tucker Carlson is probably going to get picked up somewhere else. I don't know for sure. I'm sure he could probably go on Rumble and get a Rumble exclusive show like Glenn Greenwald and Russell Brand and Kim Iverson have. He could do that. He could start his own podcast and just, it'll take off. It'll take off. He could start a podcast like Joe Rogan and it'll take off because people like to hear what he has to say. So, I mean, I think Tucker Carlson will be fine. Don't know about Don Lemon, though. Maybe Tucker and Don Lemon will team up and start their own show together. Maybe that could happen. I don't know. EJ says, so what has that lawsuit got to do with Tucker? It doesn't make any sense. I don't know, man. Maybe he's not the last person to go. Maybe they're cleaning house. But the point that I want to make is Rupert Murdoch. Let's remember, he is a billionaire. So even though Tucker Carlson had the #1 show, he was still working for a billionaire at the end of the day. Look up Rupert Murdoch. This guy was in a lot of stuff. Lots of stuff. So just, I don't know. What? JB goes, they can call it Tucker Lemon. You guys are funny. Casey, the Don Carlson show, the Tucker Lemon show, Tucking with Don. This is hilarious. Oh my gosh. Don can go to News Nation with ex-BFF Chris Cuomo. He can, yeah. He probably can go over there. Oh my gosh. A remake of The Odd Couple, the Oracle says. Oh, you guys are funny tonight. Red says it would be perfectly fine for Don Lemon to climb under a rock and never be heard from again. Oh, man. Oh, my God. This is hilarious. But yeah, both of those happened in the same day. And so a lot of us were just kind of like, what is going on in media? We'll talk more about that tonight on Call-In. I was going to finish up Nevada tonight, but looking at the time, I'll have to do that on Thursday for Nevada Ballot Initiative. But we'll talk more about it tonight, because I want you to think about big media, what this means for big media, and what this can mean for independent media. Because let's be real, Fox ratings are going to drop. Can't say the same for CNN, though. CNN's ratings probably are still declining anyway, because. But their ratings are going to drop. And what could this mean for independent media? A lot of you are watching tonight. I don't know what brought you over, but welcome. If you're new, subscribe, hit that like button. All right. I'm going to take a quick break. I'll come back. We'll move on over to Carlin and Eric. I think we got a couple super chats.
All right. Super chats. You got it. All right. Here we are. Corey, can you turn up the light in here a little? Corey, my helper. All right. So this is where we give Sabby a little break. And let me check my volume level. Yeah, that looks good enough. And then we'll be coming back with the call-in. We'll be getting the, let me put the call-in. Yes, there is a call-in tonight. I'll put the link in the chat if any of you want to get a head start. But this is where we give Sabby a little break, and then we come back and end the show, and then we jump into call-in here. Yeah, there's the link. You can do call-in on your browser, or you can do the call-in app on your cell phone, search for Sabby Sabs, and it'll come right up on the call-ins where we hear what you have to say, what you think. And yeah, we want to hear what's on your mind. Let's see. What's the call-in tonight? Yeah, we got Tucker and Don fired. We talk about that or anything you all want to talk about. Speaking of what you've been talking about, let's see what we got for these chats and super chats. Thanks for the super chat, Steve. Marianne's ground game was light today. They both took the day off. Thanks for that, Steve. And thanks for the super sticker, Michael Pino. And thanks for this super chat, Robbie Rob. That's from Don Lemon. He said, I love this. Was it Don Lemon? No, it was the other guy. John King, wasn't it? He was, anyways, the CNN guy. He said, I love this place. Yeah, blink twice if you need help. Thanks for that, Robbie Rob. And Hector, thanks for the super chat. Hey, Sabby, I heard a rumor that Fox News was actually going to continue paying Tucker in his contract so that he can't go back on air anywhere. I wouldn't put it past them if they can manage that. And thanks for this super chat, Jonathan. Sandy Cortez is one of the worst out there, and she's taking people's money to do the same than corporate politicians. Let's go, Sandy. Thanks for that, Jonathan. Thanks for this super chat, Axel Strife. Carlson was number one in his time slot with Democrats. Astounding indeed. Thanks for that. And thanks for the super chat, Steve. Cage match, pay-per-view, Tucker versus Don could make millions. Yep, thanks for that. And thanks for this super chat, Beth. Tucker could team up with James O'Keefe. Yep, that would be interesting. And I think we got one out here on the Rockfins. Let's see what we got out there. Thanks for this a tipped comment on Rockfins, Roger Meadows. Breaking sent DM of study saying 300K per year gross is now needed to net 100K per year in New York City. Thanks for that comment, Roger. Excuse me. So let's see. Yeah, so we got Colin coming up, and we want to hear what you got to say and what you've been thinking. You know, one of the things I've been thinking about is how like we here on what I like to call the real left, like when we talk about stories and whatnot, there's a concept it's been kicking around in my head that I'm calling do the pivot. And the idea is whenever we talk about any story that's coming up, almost regardless of what it's about, we should pivot at the end of the story to like what's really driving it. I'm going blank. What's a good example, Corey? Of a story that then you do the pivot on. So I got my man Corey here. All right. So if you do a story like on the housing shortage, right? And you can talk about they'll talk about like the NIMBYs and so um, liberals will talk about, oh, they're all for affordable housing and want more housing, but then when it comes down to do it, like they don't want it in their backyard, and they're worried about their housing costs and whatnot. And so then what do we really need? Well, we really need a government that really works for the 99% and just builds housing. We just need to build a ton of affordable housing. And so why aren't they doing that? Well, it always comes back to the money. So I'm saying, if you're talking about that story, then at the end of the story, pivot to the money and say, well, the reason this isn't happening is because everyone in the government and in positions of power is paid off. They're in the pocket of the real estate lobby and the huge money interest. And so if you end that story and you don't pivot to the money, then you're not getting down to the real core of it. And then if you're doing that and you're saying, okay, the money they're basically paid and it's legalized bribery, then the next pivot you can do the double pivot, is getting to the solutions. And so if the problem is the money is running everything and the politicians are paid off, then the solution is you have to deal with the money, and that gets into how do you cut those puppet strings? And like Corey says, yeah, always follow the money. And if you're going to deal with the puppet strings, and then it gets into those things like public financing of campaigns and real campaign finance regulations, and then you can run into issues with the Supreme Court issues, and that the Supreme Court can knock down and vote against if you have real strong campaign finance regulations. So if you're going to deal with that, then you got to deal with Citizens United, and you need kind of an amendment to for like a move to amend that says corporations aren't people, money's not speech. All right, I talked about the pivot.
All right.
Maybe I'll talk about it more in call-in. All right,
That's
we'll see you all in call-in in a bit.
All right, guys, we are moving over to call in tonight's episode. This is episode 99. We're almost at episode 100. Tucker and Dawn fired. Tucker Carlson and Dawn Lemon have been fired. Now that we have more information, let's chat about it. What does this mean for mainstream media and the future of independent media? So we can talk about that. We can also talk about any of the other stories that I mentioned tonight as well, excuse me, as well, or anything else that you want to chat about. So let's head on over to call in. I think I'm going to head out with this video. Let's see. Oh, Eric, can you pull up the first screen? I want to head out with that cold open that I started with, because some of you didn't see that. Jose is doing the damn thing. And this is Jose confronting people in media, which also needs to happen. I've said this before. When you do these protests, when you're protesting police brutality, when you're protesting against climate, we need to also protest CNN. We need to protest MSNBC. We need to protest Fox News. We need to be protesting these journalists who have been driving the narrative that has people believing that everything's fine when it's not, because they're the ones that do control the narrative. So shout out to Jose. We're going to head out with this. And after this plays, I'll see you over at Call-In.
Oh, with Seymour Hersh? I'm looking for the one with Seymour Hersh because it's a policy and press hall event. So shouldn't we be talking about the Nord Stream, since that's the biggest story of the century? And you guys, I'm sorry. I mean, you have the executive editor of the New York Times there who came out with a phony story to try and block Seymour Hersh. It's just kind of funny how that happened, I mean, did you even acknowledge Seymour Hersh? All of you are executive editors of papers that broke Pentagon, My Lai, Watergate. Is this the same papers or not? I mean, is there anything you've gotten right in the last 20 years, or am I mistaken about that? I mean, it's just kind of funny because Iraq, wrong. Syria, wrong. Russiagate, really wrong. Okay, I mean, the list goes on and on. So the last thing you could do to try and actually fix your reputation is acknowledge that through leaks, we had to find out that Zelensky was going to bomb Moscow on the anniversary. I mean, if you're so impartial, shouldn't you at least say, right, that Zelensky was going to bring us on the verge of World War III? That seems pretty fair. While Julian Assange rots in prison, all of you got, fat checks because he's in jail for doing your job. And you know what? Tucker Carlson ain't no Seymour Hersh, but he did something you guys are scared to do. Speak the truth and actually be critical of the war, which is why he was actually fired from Fox, because you are all cowards. Every single one of you. None of you have actually had any relevancy. And you know what? The mainstream press is now dying. Nobody's ever going to listen to you again. You have no credibility with the public. The only people who care about what you have to say are elite assholes who have nothing productive to say anymore. And it's dying off. So will you at least say something, either about Nord Stream or Ukraine or the fact that Zelensky brought us to the verge of World War III and the only reason we knew about that was through leaks? Go ahead. It's a free speech event, right? You guys are the press. Let's say something here. Mr. Khan, come on. You're the executive editor of the New York Times, I'm just trying to get into some good trouble here, man. Ooh, listen, Karen, get out of my face for a second. I got to talk to these gentlemen. Okay. Well, I just want to hear what they have to say. Go ahead. I'm done.
Wait your turn.
You're not going to tell them to you. Come.
Wait your turn.
You could project if we can't.
I would just say I think it's important to hear everybody's point of view.
Yeah.
So thank you.
All right.
I do think that we need to give our moderator a chance to ask other questions.
We're on the verge of World War III.
Let's go. Really, thank you.
Say something about this bombing. We blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Listen, don't stand there while there are people rotting in prison. Nobody said anything about Uhuru, right? The socialists who are in jail for being critical of this war. God damn it. Let's go. At least say something about the people in jail for being critical of this war. They don't deserve to be in prison right now.
Well said. Well said. Thank you so much, Miss, for the super chat. Today, UN Security Council was about Palestine and condemning Israel. Interesting. All right, let's go ahead and head on over to Call-In. That link is pinned to the top of the chat. All right, guys, have a good night. Keep up the fight.